tell that the gospel was written by male? Let that settle in. Those of you who have had children, I know you've long since forgotten what it's like to be in labor. I could tell a story from our family system, but I better not, or I can't go back home again. I also forgot to mention during the announcements, by the way, that just a very few weeks we're going to be receiving new members. So if you've been thinking about that, or you want to have a conversation, want to know more about the church, then I certainly would relish the opportunity to talk with you. There's at least 3 people who have said to me that they're ready to join. So it's always nice, I find, for people to stand with others rather than to try to do something solo. Arlene was secretary in the first church that I took a call to out of seminary. It was the last Baptist gig of my life. I finished my seminary courses, and so I took a call, against my better judgment, to a church that was growing like crazy on the other side of the state in Tampa. Now it's this massive mega church. Who could have even thought? So she was located between the senior pastor's office and my office. And so she received most of the folk that came in at the desk. The secretary who did most of the clerical work was kind of isolated, so she didn't get picked off by the visitors who came in who would distract her from her work. Arlene taught Sunday school class. She was this wonderful woman, very caring, and she had a Sunday school class of mostly older women. And she had a fixation, and thus they had a fixation on listening to radio throughout the day. And what she wanted them to listen to was this program, and this was before the internet was the internet, but there was a radio station in Tampa that carried like constant programming from Moody Bible Institute in Chicago, a rather evangelical school there. And so they would listen to these sermons and Bible teachings and so forth, but they also listened to the music. And the music was pretty much hymns being sung with lovely organ music that sounded somewhat like a memorial service. And they fed themselves off of this. Now, as they fed themselves off of this, and they fed to one another their problems and their challenges, it seemed to take on a life of its own. So most of what Arlene did was talk with members of her Sunday school class on the telephone about their depressions and how they were just worried and how horrible the world was. Every once in a while, they would drop the line, well, Jesus may come back tomorrow, and that's going to fix everything. But it was hard. And so it was difficult for me one day to kind of wander into that. I shouldn't have gone there, but wander into that conversation. And a part of it was to try to say to her, God is at work in the world now. There is hope in the world now. There are possibilities for ministry and people to experience real fulfillment in life now. And I know the problems your class have are difficult. But maybe if the focus shifted, I started to say, if you listen to a little more upbeat music, but I knew that wasn't ever going to happen. I just could never see this class, like dancing like we did last night. It was hard because this is an example of how people can get so caught up in seeing the world only in one way that they end up losing their way. Jesus is saying in this text today to the disciples, I'm going away. And that was hard. But then Jesus said to them, hey, But don't get the feeling you're alone, because in a little while I'm coming back. That set the disciples into the scratching of their heads. Wow. So Jesus is going away, but he's coming back. What does that exactly mean? And so the question gets asked. And it leads to another conversation. You know, what does it mean to live when someone you love, and in their case, someone to whom you have devoted your life, says to you, I'm going away? How is it that you live in that in-between state? Last fall, when I went to Delaware to see family, and yes, I love seeing my daughters, but they know, most of all, I came to see the granddaughter, even though I love them dearly. My granddaughter is absolutely brilliant, and why should she not be? Because after all, never mind. But she has this disposition, how do you call this? Fit pitching. She likes to pitch fits. And wow, she's good at it. It was a Sunday evening. We'd had a good weekend. I'd had a chance, the fishing was on the agenda. Things were going well, and it happened. She just kind of came apart. And inconsolable is not even a word that I can use, because then I have to think of 3 or 4 adverbs. Finally, I was trying to watch the football game. I said to my daughter and son-in-law, don't y'all want to go for a ride? Now, first of all, my daughter looks at me like, what have you got in mind with the granddaughter? I just kind of grinned and I said, so she said, yes, let's go for a ride. So they got their coats and they went outside to the car. So now she's over here in the corner and is just sitting on the floor, wailing. I just keep watching the football game. Shortly, she says, so when is Mom and Dad coming back? I said, well, when you're together, I'll call them. She says, I'm ready now. I said, no, not quite yet. So when you get over here on the couch, we get everything dried up, then I'll take my phone out and you can help me call. Gradually, she made her way down to the far end of the couch. I'm ready now. No, not quite yet. Need to kind of come on over this way so you can help me dial. She got halfway down the couch. I'm ready now. No, not quite yet. Finally, she gets over to sitting beside me. I take my phone out, push the contacts so she could see. Well, she didn't know her mom's name on the contacts, but I said, push that button. She did. And I said to my daughter, Delia's ready for you to come home now. And they said, oh, great. And in about 10 minutes, they walked in the house. And I could finish watching the last quarter in peace. That longing and waiting for her was so hard. Because for a few minutes, she had control of the household. But when they went away, things changed. The people she loved most and depended upon, Pop-Pop's okay, but he only gets here every so often. The waiting and the coming back, there was great relief, and she tried not to, but a big smile broke across her face. Waiting is in the gaps is the hard part, isn't it? Jesus is saying to the disciples, I'm going away. You're going to have to wait. You're going to have to live in this time. Isn't it interesting how sadness and joy can get all mixed up? and all of our emotions at the same time. I said last week that the polarities that we deal with in our society and our families are all a part of us, which is what makes it difficult for us. But it's also true that our emotions are complicated, that we can feel sadness and we can feel joy almost at the same moment. Every victory that we experience in life also comes with awareness of our limitation. You know, the old wide world of sports thing, the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat. Everybody who's ever competed knows that if it's not today, it's tomorrow. And if one thing happens today, tomorrow it may be different. It's always in play because we're humans and don't have complete control of the universe in which we live. This commingling of feelings, every embrace that we have, also makes us aware that at any given moment we can experience loneliness. The friendships that we treasure most, we know that there's going to be distance because distance is absolutely necessary in order to maintain the intimacy that we so do desire. It's part of the deeper reality of what it means to be human. Jesus knew this. Simone Weil wrote, "Waiting patiently in expectation is the foundation of spiritual life. Without patience, our expectation kind of degenerates into wishful thinking." Patience comes from the word patior, meaning, of course, at its root, suffering. How appropriate. Jesus is trying to say to the disciples, I'm going away. You're going to have to wait. But then again, Jesus knew that all of what he was about was going to lead to suffering. And all of what they would be about would ultimately lead to suffering. Living in those places, those hard places, which takes us back to the previous 2 weeks when we've had our focus on the deserted places. How you live with expectations, how you live in the midst of possibilities of suffering comes from the possibilities of spending time with God and getting clarity about who you are and what your purpose in life is. You'll weep now, Jesus says. It's going to be hard. But then, of course, there's the old adage that comes in another place, but joy comes in the morning. Learning how to live in those gaps is such a crucial, crucial thing. We end up, Henri Nouwen reminded the readers years ago, we end up facing in those gaps 2 horrendous temptations. We get there, we lose our focus, and we end up bored. That has led us to the screen society, as I call it. We have screens in church. Now, I know none of you ever go to a bar, but if you accidentally came into one, you may have seen a screen somewhere. We have our phones and our screens, and so we eat dinner and we look at our screens. We look at screens everywhere, coming and going. I have a screen in my vehicle. I wished I didn't have the screen sometimes, but it's there. Part of the screen connectivity that we have is that we are somewhat bored and we count on screens to kind of, give us information that we don't need and some's not even reliable. We just look for that because we're hungry and we don't quite know what we're hungry for and we're always looking for something new. And a part of that is just the boredom of living in the gaps. But then as we live there long enough, it can begin to degenerate because we find no real hope in the gaps. And so suddenly our life begins to spiral into bitterness because we can't control things. We don't know everything. We don't know how to make things exactly right. We don't know how to clean up the mess in our lives or our families' lives or the national scale of politics or the world problems. We don't know any of that. And so we become bitter people in some cases because we don't quite know how to wait and have expectancy in the waiting. The disciples weren't perfect. They messed up a lot. Gives me hope. But one of the things Jesus knew is that they had to find a way to learn how to wait in the gaps. You're going to be sad, Jesus says, but expectation brings out joy in our lives. It just does. You know, when my mom was still alive and reasonably well, I would give her some notice, but not too much notice that I was coming. And I'd get in the car and drive that 1,000 miles into the mountains of North Carolina. And I would say to her, Mom, please don't start cleaning the house. Mom, I just want to see you. You know, we'll take some road trips. That's what my dad used to do. He liked to take road trips and get lost. We'll take some road trips. We'll have time together. We'll rock in the rockers on the front porch. Just don't clean house. Don't go all out. It's like talking to a wall. I'd get there and Mom would have been working just this side of how we used to do spring cleaning back home when all of us dreaded it coming around. She'd worked so hard. And then I'd open the refrigerator. I told her that I didn't need any sugar, and I opened the refrigerator, and almost to the ceiling of the refrigerator, there was a stack of apple fried pies, because she knew I loved her apple fried pies. You know why? I know why, because later when I would experience it when my daughters came to visit me, I know why. Because you were so caught up in the joy of the moment. You were so looking forward to that visit. You were so waiting for this to come true. You anticipated and it enlivened every part of your body. And you could live and expect and wait, and you just had to do something to get ready because it was an expression of love. And no matter what God said, you had to do it. That's living expectantly, staying in that prepared, living in that sense of hopefulness, not in despair and boredom that we're out of control, but knowing that one who loved us is away but will come again. Knowing that we're not alone, that God has promised and God's steadfast mercy endures forever. It's living in those places that allows us to continue moving forward in life. How good it is to live with hopefulness. How great it is to look forward to the return of someone we love. How hard it is to suffer through the in-between times. It is the waiting that we realize how much that one has filled our lives. How important that one is to us. Jesus says, you're going to hurt. Jesus knew he couldn't really do anything about the hurt. That's a part of being human. But Jesus said, look, I'm coming. I'm going away for a while. I'll be back in a while. That's the promise that the disciples needed to do the work they were called to do. My emphasis the last 2 weeks leading into this is about the deserted places, the times of prayer and connectivity with the Holy that allows us to wait, to live with some expectation, to long for the love, to be aware that we don't have to control everybody and everything, to receive the gift of God, which in its best form is always hope and love. May God help us in our ministry not to become distressed in the hard places, but to be aware that God leads us into places we have never imagined and will sustain us no matter how we feel or what we think. I'll never get to taste those apple fried pies again, or sit on that porch in rocking chairs with people I love. I trust that there's something even better in my future and yours. Apple fried pies without the calories?